let's have our last keynote presentation today. We're going to be talking about the transformative power of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness in business success. To introduce the speaker, let me give you a brief. We have Ms. Sarah Christensen, who is an accomplished diversity, equity, and inclusion expert, and she has worked extensively as a consultant for many multinational organizations such as Amazon, HSBC, and Cartier. She holds a master's degree in occupational psychology, and she is an adjunct lecturer for the MBA program at Edinburgh Business School, Heriot-Watt University. Please give me a round of warm of applause for Miss Sarah Christensen.
Thank you. Great stuff, thank you. I remember the day that was the beginning of the end of my corporate career. My choice. My boss had called a team meeting. And in that meeting, he wanted to discuss the talent and learning strategy for next year. Now, he had decided in his infinite wisdom that we were going to focus on nothing else but e-learning. We were going to mandate to the entire organization X number of learning hours every year from here on in. We were going to limit the number of face-to-face learning interventions and just really push the online learning. In that moment, my heart absolutely sunk. And I thought, what? So I spoke up in that moment and I said, okay, boss, look, I've been out of the office. I've been speaking with lots of different stakeholders within the organization, and I know what people want. I've heard what people are looking for, and I know what's holding them back from engaging with the whole learning experience. So let me tell you what I've got. At that point, he cut me off. He stuck his hand in my face, and he said, Sarah, stop. Let me tell you what you're going to do. And I thought, no, hold on a minute. No, Sarah, let me tell you what we are going to do. And no matter how much I pushed back, he just shouted over me, louder and louder. In the end, one of my colleagues kind of nudged me in the side and said, Sarah, just be quiet. He's never going to listen to you. Just give it up. So I kept quiet. That was the day that I decided that that was no longer the organization for me. I knew that I was totally going to leave. And in the end, I left not long after and set up my own organization, Christian Consultancy. And one of the reasons why I set that up was because I wanted to work with organizations so that they were able to leverage diverse talent to be able to create inclusive cultures where employees could actually thrive. Now, I'm sure that all of you somewhere along the way have had experiences like that, where either you haven't been invited to the table, or maybe you've been talked over or ignored in terms of your voice. And it can hurt, right? It can hurt us actually quite significantly. And what's actually interesting is that neuroscience has taught us that when we're excluded in those moments, it actually triggers the same neurological pathways in our brain as physical pain. So yes, exclusion in work actually hurts. But what if we did something else? What if we created a culture where people felt they could belong, where they felt they could bring their authentic selves to the table and be respected and heard? Imagine what magic we could happen then. So today, I want to talk to you on the transformative power of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and what impact that can have in business success. So I realize that people in this room may or may not be familiar with the topic of DEIB. So I'm going to take a moment to go through some of the key concepts that we use in this agenda. The first one I want to introduce to you is equality. So what is equality? Equality is about being equal. And in organizations, if we want to be equal, we do things like apply equal pay, equal opportunities to development. We do equal annual leave for people in different ways. So equality is all about treating everyone equally. And here's a great picture to do that. Everyone has exactly the same. Now tell me, is that fair? Well, it kind of is fair because we're giving everyone the same thing. So we're being fair to each individual. But does that allow each individual to play in the game? Yeah, not quite. So then we have equity. So what is equity? Equity is about allocating resources based on need. Now, when we're in organizations, we do that by saying if someone comes in with a disability, we might adjust their work environment to make sure that they've got what they need in order to be able to do their job. That is an example of equity. And here's a great example of it in the picture too. We're giving people what they need in order to do their job. Now, is that fair? Yeah, absolutely. It is fair. And does it allow them to participate in the game? Yes, absolutely. Now, although equality and equity both promote fairness, they do it in slightly different ways, and they do it based on what we view in diversity. So what is diversity? Diversity is a fact. What are some of the different ways we're diverse? Our skin color, our gender, our age, our thinking styles, our political views, all those are different ways that we're diverse. Now, when we look at something like equality, we're diverse blind. So we're stripping out all that and we're just seeing people for exactly what they are. Everyone is equal. And that's great because we can strip out some of the biases that inherent within the decision-making process, but it is diversity blind. In contrast to that, then, we've got equity, which very much does consider diversity. It's looking at what you need, and it puts into place those things in order to make you be able to perform effectively in work. Now, that's great, but we need something a little bit more. And that's where we need to bring in the principles of inclusion. What is inclusion? Inclusion is an act. It is a choice for us to bring someone to the table and allow them to participate in the conversation. But just because they're at the table, does that necessarily mean they will participate in the conversation? Not always, but that's where we need to bring in belonging. Belonging is the feeling. It's that feeling that I can sit at that table, I can bring my authentic self to that table, and I can have that conversation and my voice will be heard. And we need all of these within the organization in order to create that consciously inclusive culture where our employees can thrive. Now, why does inclusion matter? Inclusion matters. There's lots of research to tell you exactly why inclusion matters. It's about attracting top talent. It's about making sure they stay. It's all about innovation and the connection with creativity. It's about the growth, not just of your people, but your customers. And it's all about profitability. But so what? Just out of interest, how many of you have a robust DEI agenda as part of your organization? Hands up. Fantastic. Okay, not too many. All right. For those of you who don't, why not? What are some of the reasons why you don't have it? Any thoughts? Time? Cost? Leadership buy-in? Absolutely. When I go out to work with organizations, I hear these excuses quite a lot, and in particular from the senior leaders. So it's like, well, why do I need to be investing in this? Well, with something like DEIB, it can actually be quite difficult to connect the real tangible differences in an organization. This is great, wonderful academic work, but how does it impact me on an everyday basis in an organization? So what I want to do today is, rather than sit here and present a whole load of academic insights as to why you should all be using DEIB as an initiative within your organization, I want to present some live case studies from our work that we have done with working with organizations to implement this agenda. All right, so I'm going to start off with diversity. Now, what I love about diversity is there's such a strong link between diversity and innovation. And it's a very simple mechanism. What is the key business proposition, or what is the key thing that businesses want to do? Make money. It's all about making money, absolutely, of course. But how does it do that? The idea behind a business is to try and differentiate yourself from your competitors so that customers will go, I want to buy from you. I want to shop with you. I want to take your service. But in order to get that differentiation, you need innovation. But how do you get that innovation? You've got to bring that diverse group of people round the table. So that's kind of how we kind of look at the process of innovation, but what does that look like in a real life case study? So I was coaching a lovely gentleman who was CEO of a boutique hotel, and real strong advocate for DEI and real passionate, inclusive leader within the organization. So the business had decided as a new business stream that what they wanted to do was to create a women's only floor within their part of the hotel wing so that women could come and feel safe knowing that they had a women's only floor. So he's like, great. So he brought his executive team together. He sat there and he looked, okay, let's start organizing this strategy. Let's put all the execution we need to do in place. And he looked up and he said, what do a bunch of middle-aged balding men know about the experience of female solo travelers? Not sure I've got this one right. So he got up from that meeting and he walked out of the boardroom and he went for a walk around the hotel. And he went and he spoke to the staff, the front of house staff, the back house staff, the people in the kitchens. He even went and spoke to the hotel guests to find out what was going to make this unique proposition an exceptional experience. And what he got from that was incredible insights. Ladies, here's a question for you. You're going to stay away for a business trip. What's the one thing you need to pack with you before you go? Mobile? Makeup? Clothes? Yes, what else? Absolutely, hair dryer. So for all of you, now guys, you may not get this, but from a female perspective, the hotel hair dryers are dire. You are never going to use them because, let's face it, you're going to a business meeting. You want to look your best, you want to feel your best, and if you use those hotel hair dryers, you're going to come out with some puffy bouffon that's never going to mean you're taking serious. I'm seeing no heads nodding here. You know what I mean. Absolutely. So one of the first things they did as part of that proposition was put in some really decent hair dryers. But do you think a bunch of balding middle-aged men could come up with that on their own? Absolutely not. The other things they did were things like they put in some really decent lighting into the bathroom so that when you're applying your makeup, absolutely, you need to have some good light doing that. And the final thing they did was put a full-length mirror on the back of the door. If you're going out for that business meeting, you want to go and have one final check to make sure you're absolutely rocking it before you go and take on the world. So those were very simple things that he put into place as part of that proposition. But he realized he was never going to be able to come up with those solutions on his own. And he needed the innovation and the diversity of thoughts and perspectives from those people around him to be able to put up with that proposition. And that's a really great business revenue for that individual now. The next one I want to talk to you about is this idea of inclusion. So I was working with a consultancy firm, a global consultancy firm, and I was engaging with their head of strategy. And she was a really strong advocate for DEI, and she knew that what we needed was really kind of putting into place something around inclusion to really sort out the culture. But she gave me a caveat. She said, I'll pre-warn you before you go into the lion's den, the senior leaders are just vile. They're so skeptical about this whole concept of DEI. I feel sorry for you going into the lion's den. One of them even said DEI was just a fluffy HR initiative. And I'm like, all right then. So I asked in that moment, forget D&I. What is the one business problem you're looking to solve right now? And she said, well, it's our attrition rates. Our dropout rates of staff at the moment is kind of going through the roof, and it's really worrying them. I said, leave it with me. So I did a bit of audit before I went in. I had a look at some of their engagement scores. I looked at a bit of exit interview, looked at a bit of the data, and I was like, right, I kind of got a feel of that. What was the issues that were going on? And there was a couple of really big key ones. There was no psychological safety with the people. People were afraid to speak up, and when they did speak up, they felt that they weren't going to be heard. There was complete inequalities within career progression, and unless you were part of the boys' network, you weren't going to get anywhere. But also there was a real lack of appreciation of people actually had a life outside work, and really working an 80-hour week was not acceptable. So I took all that on board, and I could clearly see there was something wrong with inclusion. So I presented the senior leadership team with this. So the attrition rates of the average professional service globally, according to the LinkedIn data, was 14%. They were sitting at 22%. So I said, okay, go with this. So if we're saying for one employee, general rule of thumb, for one employee to leave the organization, that would cost you approximately 1.5 times their annual salary. Give or take a bit. Go with the numbers, right? So if we're saying that the average employee, middle manager level, coming in at, say, roughly maybe about 7K per month, for that 1 year that they leave after 1 year, that's going to cost you 126K walking out the door with them. Okay. Now, you're a 700 employee service. What does that look when it's got 22% attrition rates? That's 154 people leaving. Who's good at the maths? What was that going to come out at? 19 million potentially walking out the door of that organization every year because they weren't keeping their staff. So I said to them, what if we could do something? Not solve everything in one go, but what if we could just raise your attrition rates from 22% to the global average of 14%? How much could you save? Answer, 7 million. So I smugly looked at them and said, DEI just another fluffy HR initiative then? Not quite so. So there's a lot of business in this. It's not just some fluffy HR, there's a real impact to the bottom line. And what was interesting was after presenting this to the senior leadership team, they could actually see it was worthwhile them investing into DEI in order to create not just a much better, more engaged organization, but also it had significant impact to the bottom line. Next case study I'd like to present to you is one on equity. So thinking about equity, equity is about allocating resources based on need. So this was with a semi-government agency who was involved in mining. Now, as you can imagine, mining's a pretty male-dominated industry, yeah? But they had been making quite a conscious effort to bring in women into the organization. But they've started to notice a bit of disengagement levels. So they brought myself and the team in and sort of said, okay, do a bit of an investigation, work out what's going on, and give us your recommendations. So we started off by doing a series of listening exercises. We did some interviews of the women themselves and also of the line managers just to hear what was going on. And then we did some ethnographic research where we went on, got my hard hat on, got my fancy boots on and all that, and off I went to follow the women round the organisation on a day-to-day basis when they were out, engineers in the front line doing what they needed to do to find out what were some of the challenges they were experiencing. So what was interesting, there was a couple of key things that we identified. Number one, women didn't feel safe. When they were traveling on the worker buses, they might be the only female there. Also at night, there was hardly any other women round. So when they were on the night shift, they didn't feel safe. When they needed to use the facilities, like taking showers or go to the prayer room, they had to go, in some cases, 10 minutes down the road to try and use the facilities, which again was causing resentment because I'm now having to leave my place, my base, to go and use the washroom. We also noticed that the uniforms that they were wearing, they were essentially small men's uniforms. They were ill-fitting, it was really uncomfortable, and in some cases, because of what they were doing, they were actually becoming unhelpful and a hazard to them and unsafe. That, in addition to the tools, really big, heavy tools that they were using. Fine if you were a big, strapping man, but they were struggling to be able to lift these things off. So I did all this, and then I presented back my results. The issue here was that the organization was focusing on equality. They were treating the women exactly the same as the men, and they hadn't given in this consideration to what exactly was equity. So that was really hindering the performances of women, and because they didn't have access to the right types of resources and tools, it was really hindering their performance. So as a result of that, what we ended up putting in place were things like we put female night guards on so that if something happened to the women while they were on night shift, they actually were able to call a female security guard, which made them feel so much more comfortable. The organization started putting facilities close by so they could go to pray, use the washrooms close by, and they didn't have to leave. And also they started looking at ergonomic tools. What could we do to either automate things or potentially redesign tools and equipment to make sure that everyone could be able to use them? That created such a positive impact, not just on the women of the organization, but actually what we did find out as a result of that was that men were now starting to come forward and ask for what they needed in order to do their job as best they could. As a result of that, then we started getting a lot more engagement and a lot more positivity in the organization as well, and performance. Final case study that I want to share with you is one on belonging. So I was doing a session on allyship with a group of senior leaders from the tech and IT industry, and we were talking about something called privilege. Now, privilege is aspects of our identity that give us an advantage in life. So it might be our race, our skin color, our passport, our seniority in the organization. And at the end of the session, at the end of the exercise we were doing on privilege, I kind of said, anything there surprise you? And one gentleman stuck his hand up and he said, Sarah, I don't understand some of the questions you asked there. Like, for example, you asked, do you ever feel unsafe walking around your city at night? It's Dubai. It's super safe. Everyone feels so safe in Dubai. And then another one of the participants put her hand up, and it was a female, and she said, actually, that's not true. Let me give you an example of what happened to me last weekend when I was doing my grocery shopping. It was 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and I was walking around the grocery store, and I was being followed by this gentleman. And he kept wanting to try and engage with me. He kept wanting to try and touch me. And I asked him, please leave me alone. But he wouldn't. I ended up having to go and get the security guard to kick him out of the shop because it was making me feel so uncomfortable and unsafe. But that was Dubai at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning while I was doing my grocery shopping. So it's not true for everyone. The guy turned around and said, "What? No, I don't think so. I've never heard of anything like that before. None of my female friends have ever told me that they've ever experienced anything." It's like, I'm not sure how accurate that is. And I just thought, bam. In that moment, he had just made one of the most acute mistakes he could possibly make. He let his privilege blind him to the experience of others. And I thought, how am I going to navigate this one now? But actually something amazing happened, and it turned around that one of the other participants said, "Actually, I think she's got a point. And just because it hasn't happened to you doesn't mean it's not true." And I could see him thinking about this, and he kind of sat back and he was like, "Do you know what? You're right. I haven't experienced anything like that, and I don't know what it's like, but thank you for sharing that. I've learned something from your perspective." And I thought, oh, thank goodness. But what was really interesting about there was the whole change in dynamic in the room after that. People started to open up. People started to be vulnerable and share all those times that they haven't had their needs met, that the time they haven't been able to bring their authentic self to the workplace. And it was such a fantastic session because people were really being curious, they were collaborating, and they were showing such high levels of compassion and empathy. It was just such an amazing learning experience. The end of that session then, those senior leaders decided they wanted to really go away and capture so much more understanding about what the experience of others were. So we subsequently input something called reverse mentoring. Has anyone heard of reverse mentoring? Flip side, so it's where the senior leaders of the organization agreed to be mentored by more junior members of the organization. And in doing that, they had such an amazing experience of learning insights about what it was like to be the lived experience of people more junior within the organization, and were able to adapt some policies and process to make that so much more inviting and sense of belonging for everyone going through. So look, I hope from those case studies that you've been able to see the real tangible benefits that actually organizations can have when they bring in DEIB, that diversity, that equity, that inclusion and belonging. But it's not just about the why, it is also about the actions. And I realize I've got literally 0 minutes to do this, so let me very quickly give you some insights. I want to leave you with a few things you can take away from today to really start implementing DEIB in your organization. Firstly, I want you to talk about bringing it into your strategy. And it doesn't have to be sitting at the boardroom. Sit at your team meetings and go, how do we make what our next objectives are more inclusive? Let's start talking about equity rather than equality. Let's think about what we can do to make sure everyone is getting the resources they need in order to do their job. Fostering psychological safety, such a key part to do it, and there's 2 really key questions that are things that you need to do for that. Curious questioning and active listening doesn't cost anything, but can have such a significant impact on what your people feel like in the organization. Finally, seek out those diverse perspectives. A great way, and I'm going to challenge you all to do this in your next meeting, it's called a team tally. Write the name of all your employees down on that meeting on a piece of paper. Every time they talk, just do a little tally. At the end of that meeting, see who's spoken and see who hasn't. Are you really getting diverse perspectives in your team meeting or not? Who do you need to be asking in order to get that? And finally, measure and act on the data. It could be quick and easy wins. There's always quick and easy wins. So do what you can in order to push this through. Ladies and gentlemen, I know I'm at the end and I've gone a little bit over time, so Mansoor, I apologize profusely, but please can I leave you with one final thing. The true power of inclusion is unleashed when everyone feels that they are heard, that they're respected, and able to participate in making meaningful decisions that positively impact the world today. Thank you so much for your attention and for staying this late. I know it's late, and thank you so much for that. Please, if you do have any questions, I will be doing an expert session tomorrow, so please come find me and ask me anything. Thank you so much. Thank you.